On your feet, janitor boy. The words cracked across the barracks like a whip. Boots thudded against the concrete floor as heads turned, some grinning, some just relieved it wasn't them. Pavet Marcus Hill stood frozen, toothbrush in hand, the faint smell of bleach still clinging to his uniform from his detail that morning. Sergeant Blake's eyes burned holes through him, his voice sharp enough to peel paint. Your daddy scrubbed floors and looks like you're about to do the same. Men like you don't last in my army. Laughter broke out from the bunks, cruel and careless, echoing off the cinder block walls. Marcus kept his eyes down, fighting the heat in his chest. He didn't say a word. He never did. They say silence is weakness. But sometimes silence is the only shield you've got. That night, the barracks smelled like sweat and boot polish. Each pair of boots lined perfectly under the racks, laces tucked just so, but all eyes kept cutting toward Marcus. He just finished relacing his after Blake had kicked them across the floor earlier. Sloppy, Blake had barked, even though the inspection wasn't his to run. The others chuckled as Marcus bent, calm and slow, sliding his boots back into place. From the corner, Latoon Ramirez walked by, clipboard under his arm, his face unreadable. He didn't say a thing, but Marcus caught the faintest flicker of a glance, something that looked a lot like pity. In chow hall the next morning, Marcus carried his tray down the line. Eggs, gray sausage, rubber pancakes, the usual. He sat at the end of the table, away from the laughter and clicks. Just as he picked up his fork, Blake's hand slammed down, knocking the tray to the floor. The food splattered, syrup dripping across his boots. Guess you missed a spot, janitor boy, Blake sneered. The table roared. Some recruits laughed too loud, trying to win points with the sergeant. Others stared at their plates, not daring to interfere. Marcus stood, bent down, and cleaned up the mess himself. He picked the tray back up, walked it to the scullery, and never said a word. His face was stone. His fists, though, they shook just enough to betray the storm he swallowed. That was how it always went. The army runs on cadence and discipline, but it also runs on unspoken hierarchies, the ones that say where you sit, how much you're worth, who people believe you'll become. Marcus carried the weight of his last name. His father had mopped hospital floors after Vietnam. His mother still worked nights in a diner. Everyone knew it. Everyone used it against him. At mail call, when others tore into care packages, Marcus got nothing but the same thin envelope. A letter from his mom with a pressed church bulletin inside. Praying for you, it read. Blake held it up one night, reading it aloud in a falsetto voice, until the barracks howled with laughter. Marcus said nothing. He just folded it back into the envelope and tucked it under his pillow. Later, when the lights went out, he pulled it out again and read it by flashlight until his eyes blurred. There was one man who noticed, Corporal Johnson. He never said much, but once, after a brutal PT session where Blake had smoked Marcus until his arms gave out, Johnson dropped a canteen by his side and walked off without a word. A small gesture, but Marcus felt it. It reminded him someone saw, someone understood. Still, most nights ended the same. Blake finding new ways to remind him he was nothing. You'll wash out by Christmas, he'd say. You don't have the blood for this. Men are born soldiers. You're born help. Marcus never snapped, never raised his voice, never fought back. He just tightened the laces on his boots each morning and showed up. The barracks grew used to the routine. Blake's insults, the laughter, Marcus's silence. But under that silence, something else was building. Every time he picked himself up, every time he took another insult and walked away, he was stacking weight like plates on a barbell. And weight like that, once it's lifted, has a way of surprising people. I thought that was the end of it. Just another day, another humiliation. But what I never expected was how quickly everything could turn. That night, Marcus slipped a photo from his locker and stared at it until the lights went out. It was his father in uniform, 30 years younger, silver star pinned on his chest, smiling like he'd already carried the weight of a nation on his back. Marcus tucked the photo into his breast pocket, close to his heart. He whispered to himself the same words his dad used to say, "Don't break, don't bend, just stand." And for the first time since he'd stepped off the bus, Marcus let himself wonder if maybe, just maybe, his silence wasn't weakness at all. Maybe it was the thing that would one day change everything. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. Rain has a way of stripping a man down to what he really is. That morning, the sky opened up on the training field, and every drop felt like it was trying to hammer us into the dirt. Sergeant Blake had us running the obstacle course again and again. By the third round, men were gasping, slipping in the mud, cursing under their breath. Marcus? He slipped too, but he didn't curse. He just got back up, mud sliding down his face, and kept moving. Blake barked, "You're slower than molasses, Hill. My grandmother could drag herself through this pit faster than you." Laughter rippled, bitter and sharp. Marcus wiped the mud from his eyes and went again. Nobody cheered. Nobody helped. But he didn't quit. Later in the barracks, the rain still drummed against the tin roof, steady like a war drum. Marcus sat at his bunk, pulling apart his rifle, cleaning every piece like it was the only thing he could control in this whole world. Blake walked by, shook his head, and muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "You can shine that all you want, janitor boy, but a mop doesn't turn into a rifle." A few chuckles followed. Marcus didn't look up. He just kept polishing, slow and deliberate. But I could see it. His jaw clenched, the tendon in his neck tight as rope. He wanted to say something. He didn't. And somehow, that silence hurt worse than if he'd screamed. That night, Chow Hall was the same circus it always was. Greasy meatloaf, mashed potatoes like paste, the clatter of trays and boots echoing. Marcus walked in, tray balanced in his hands. He sat down at the far end, like always. Blake followed, smirking. "Hope you enjoy your slop, Hill. Probably reminds you of home, huh? Cold leftovers and paper plates?" He flicked a spoonful of potatoes onto Marcus's lap. The recruits roared. Marcus looked down at the mess, picked up his napkin, and wiped it away without a word. He kept eating, one bite at a time, calm, but his hands shook just enough for me to notice. And for a second, even the laughter around him faltered, like they were unsettled by how much he refused to break. After chow, it was PT again. Blake singled Marcus out, of course. "Front and center, Hill. Push-ups. Don't stop till I say." Marcus dropped to the ground. The rest of us watched as Blake leaned over him, sneering. "Look at this form. Weak, embarrassing. This man wouldn't last one night downrange." Marcus pushed. 1, 2, 10, 20. Mud clung to his palms. His arms trembled. Blake pressed, his boot between Marcus's shoulders, adding weight. "Come on, janitor boy. Show us what you're made of." Marcus's face pressed into the mud, but he pushed again. 40, 50. The veins in his neck stood out like cords. And then something happened. Corporal Johnson, who rarely said a word, stepped forward. "That's enough, Sergeant." His voice was steady, calm. Blake turned, eyes narrowing. "What was that, Corporal?" Johnson shrugged, but his gaze lingered on Marcus. "Just saying, he's got heart." The words hung in the air. Simple, but they mattered. Blake laughed it off, barking at Marcus to keep going. But everyone had heard. Someone saw. Someone finally admitted it. By lights out, the barracks smelled of sweat, wet boots, and cheap soap. The guys joked and laughed, but Marcus lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He pulled out a battered field manual, pages curled from use, and started reading with a small flashlight. While others snored, he studied. Movement techniques, radio codes, tactical formations, things most recruits barely glanced at. Every page he read, every note he scribbled in the margins, it was like he was preparing for something none of us could see. I thought, why? Why put yourself through that when everyone's against you? But maybe he wasn't doing it for us. Maybe he was doing it for something bigger. Weeks dragged on like that. Rain, drills, chow hall taunts. Blake never let up. "You're dead weight, Hill. You'll get men killed." Each insult landed like a boot to the chest, and yet Marcus never lashed back. He trained harder. He ran longer. He carried more. His hands blistered, raw and cracked, but he never complained. The ridicule never stopped, but the silence around him started to shift. Some recruits began watching him differently, not with open respect, not yet, but with curiosity, Like they wondered what kind of man keeps getting hit and still stands back up. One evening during weapons qualification, Marcus's rifle jammed mid-drill. Blake's voice cut through the range. Of course it jammed. Hill couldn't handle a water gun. But Marcus didn't panic. He cleared the chamber, reloaded, and kept firing, calm and smooth. His grouping was tight, better than half the platoon. Johnson caught his eye, gave him the smallest nod. No one else noticed, but Marcus did. And then came the storm. Literally. A thunderstorm rolled over the base one night during night navigation drills. The rain was heavy, the ground a swamp. Everyone stumbled, lights flickering, compasses failing. Somewhere in the chaos, a recruit twisted his ankle, went down hard. Panic rippled. Blake barked orders, but his voice was drowned by the storm. That's when Marcus stepped in. He crouched down, lifted the injured man onto his shoulders, and started moving. Slow, steady, each step sinking into mud. But he carried him. "You'll break your damn back," Blake shouted. Marcus didn't answer. He just kept walking, boots dragging, rain soaking him to the bone. The squad followed his lead, falling back into formation. For once, Blake had no words. When we finally reached the rally point, Ramirez was waiting, his face unreadable, as always. He looked at Marcus, drenched, shoulders heaving, another man's weight across his back. Ramirez said nothing, just gave a sharp nod. Blake tried to speak, but his voice faltered. The silence said it all. That was the first time I saw Marcus not as the janitor's kid, not as the quiet punching bag, but as something else entirely. A soldier with grit. A man with a fire nobody could see until it burned through the rain. And in that moment I knew. Everything was about to change. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The day of the field exercise felt like a test designed to break us. We were told it was just another squad drill, but the way the instructors whispered to each other, the way the gear check ran longer than usual, you could feel it in the air. Something big was coming. The sky was low and gray, heavy with clouds that promised trouble. By the time we loaded into the trucks, rain had already started to spit, cold and sharp against our faces. Nobody talked much, just the rattle of rifles, the clink of gear, and the nervous shuffle of boots on steel floors. Sergeant Blake, as always, sat up front with his chest puffed out like he was leading us into Normandy. "Listen up," he barked, voice cutting through the roar of the engine. "This isn't about survival. It's about exposing the weak links. And I already know where that weak link sits." His eyes landed squarely on Marcus. A few recruits laughed, half-hearted. Nobody wanted to be caught on the wrong side of Blake. Marcus didn't flinch. He just stared at the floor, hands folded, lips tight. I could tell he was bracing himself, same way he had every day since the first insult in the barracks. When we hit the drop zone, the mud swallowed our boots. Trees loomed dark against the storm clouds. The exercise was simple on paper. Move as a unit, secure checkpoints, establish comms. But nothing in training ever stays simple. The first hour went smooth enough. We moved in formation, checked our maps, called out bearings. Marcus kept pace, quiet as ever, never falling behind, never speaking out of turn. Blake made sure to remind him of his place, though. "Stay in the back, Hill. Don't want you screwing this up for the rest of us." Marcus nodded and stayed silent. The turning point came fast. A simulated IED blast shook the ground, loud enough to rattle our teeth. Smoke grenades popped, turning the woods into a gray maze. The radios went dead. Static hissed in our ears. Recruits shouted over each other, confusion spreading like wildfire. "Comms are down," someone yelled. Blake shouted back, "Keep moving, don't stop. Hill, if you don't screw this up, maybe you'll live to see dinner." He was laughing, even as the formation broke apart. That's when I saw it. A recruit trapped under a fallen log, legs pinned. He was screaming, water pooling around him as the rain came harder. Everyone froze. The smoke, the shouting, the storm. It was chaos. Blake stood there, barking orders that went nowhere, his voice useless against the panic. Marcus moved first, no hesitation. He dropped his rifle, slid through the mud, and crawled toward the pinned man. Blake snarled, "Get back here, Hill. That's not your job. Marcus ignored him. He planted his shoulders against the log, pushed until his muscles shook. It didn't budge. He shifted mud up to his elbows and tried again. Gritting his teeth, he screamed through the effort. Finally, with a crack, the log rolled just enough. Two others jumped in to help. Together, they dragged the recruit out, gasping and muddy but alive. For the first time, the squad's eyes weren't on Blake. They were on Marcus. But it didn't stop there. The radios were still dead, and the storm was only getting worse. We were blind, deaf, cut off. That's when Marcus reached into his pack. Everyone had mocked him for always overpacking. Extra wires, tape, spare batteries. Blake used to call it his janitor's kit. Now in the middle of the storm, Marcus pulled it all out, kneeling in the mud, stripping wires with steady hands. The rain came down in sheets, but his focus never wavered. A few of us watched in silence as he spliced, taped, and rewired the field radio. Static crackled, then a voice broke through. "Alpha Squad, report." He had done it. Blake's jaw dropped, but he tried to cover it. "Don't think this makes you a hero, Hill. Anyone could have..." His words were drowned out by Ramirez's voice, booming through the comms. "Alpha Squad, you're the only unit still transmitting. Hold position and guide the others in." Every eye turned to Marcus, not Blake, not the loudmouth sergeant who had spent weeks tearing him down. It was Marcus's calm, steady voice that carried across the airwaves, guiding scattered squads through the storm. "Copy. Adjust heading 30 degrees north. Follow the stream until you hit the clearing." His tone was clear, calm, like he'd been doing it for years, not a crack of fear in it. Blake tried to interrupt, but Ramirez cut him off over the net. "Hill, continue. You're in charge until comms are restored." The words hit like thunder. In charge. Marcus Hill, the janitor's son, the quiet one who never fought back. He was now the one running the mission. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked. Even Blake stood frozen, color draining from his face. Hours later, when we limped back to base soaked, bruised and exhausted, Ramirez was waiting. His eyes scanned the unit, landing on Marcus. He stepped forward. "Hill," he said, voice steady. "Front and center." Marcus walked up, boots squishing with every step. Blake shifted uncomfortably behind him. Ramirez held up a folder, opened it, and pulled out a photo. He glanced at Marcus, then back at us. "Most of you don't know this, but I do. Private Hill is the son of Staff Sergeant David Hill. Silver Star, Afghanistan. Held the line when his entire platoon was cut off. Saved 12 men before evac." He looked at Marcus, then back at the squad. "And today his son proved the bloodline runs strong." A gasp rippled through the formation. Some recruits bowed their heads. Blake went pale. "No, no way," he muttered. Ramirez's voice rose, cutting through the rain. "You all mocked him. You all doubted him. But when the storm hit, when men were down and radios dead, it wasn't the loudest voice that saved you. It was the quietest. Remember that." Marcus stood there, soaked and covered in mud, staring at the ground. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just nodded once, like the weight of his father's legacy had been waiting for this moment. Blake tried one last jab, weak and trembling. "He just got lucky." Ramirez turned, eyes sharp as blades. "No, Sergeant. He didn't get lucky. He did what you couldn't. He led." The words cut deeper than any insult Blake had ever thrown. That night in the barracks, nobody laughed at Marcus. Nobody touched his tray at chow. He read his field manual like always, but this time, the room was quiet, respectful. And for the first time since we arrived at training, I think everyone understood. Marcus Hill wasn't here to survive. He was here to lead. And the man they thought was weakest had just become the one they would follow into fire. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The morning after the storm exercise, the barracks carried a different kind of silence. Usually there was chatter, boots slamming against lockers, insults thrown back and forth to cut the tension of another long day. But not this time. Men sat quieter, eyes cutting toward Marcus with something none of us had seen before. Respect. Blake walked in late, his uniform rumpled, jaw tight. He tried to bark the same orders, tried to throw his weight like always, but it landed flat. The room didn't laugh at his jokes anymore. They didn't echo his insults. They just looked past him. At chow, it was the same. Marcus picked up his tray, same old powdered eggs and burnt bacon. He moved to sit at his usual empty table, the one at the far end where nobody ever dared sit. But this time, Corporal Johnson slid his tray down right across from him. No words, just sat there, digging into his food. One by one, others followed. A couple recruits nodded. Another dropped his milk carton next to Marcus's. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, but it meant everything. The silence broke Blake more than any punch ever could. Blake tried to claw it back. "Don't forget what he is," he said, standing in the middle of the chow hall. "He's just a charity case, a janitor's son who got lucky with one storm. Don't let him fool you." The room froze, forks clattering against trays. Marcus looked up, calm as ever. "We all wear the same uniform," he said quietly. "That's all that matters." The words weren't shouted, but they cut deeper than any insult. Even Ramirez, who'd been standing near the door, gave the faintest nod. That was the moment Blake realized his grip on the platoon was gone. Later, in formation, Ramirez called Marcus forward. Rain still, clung to the parade field, the mud soft under our boots. "Private Hill," Ramirez said, his voice carrying across the ranks. "Yesterday, you held this unit together when it should have broken apart. That's what leadership looks like." He let the words hang. Blake stood 2 rows back, eyes dark, fists clenched. Ramirez didn't even look his way. He pinned the squad's top performance ribbon onto Marcus's chest and stepped back. For the first time, the man we all thought would wash out stood in front of the formation as the example. Blake couldn't take it. That night, he cornered Marcus by the barracks, his voice low and sharp. "You think you're better than me now? One storm and suddenly you're a leader?" Marcus didn't rise. He just met his eyes steady. "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just didn't quit." Blake's face twisted. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You'll regret it." But Marcus turned and walked away, leaving him in the shadows. That was worse than any fight. The real explosion came 2 days later. We were called into the auditorium for evaluation results. Every squad's scores, every recruit's performance, it was all laid out for everyone to hear. Ramirez stood at the podium, calling names, reading numbers. When he reached Blake's squad, he paused. "Sergeant Blake," Ramirez said slowly, "your leadership score dropped to the lowest in the company. Your squad, however, finished at the top." Murmurs rippled through the room. Blake shifted in his seat, face burning. Ramirez's eyes scanned us. This squad survived the storm exercise not because of rank, but because of action. Private Hill stepped up when it mattered. The record stands. The command has recognized it. It was like the air had been punched out of the room. Blake jumped to his feet. "This is a joke. He's nothing." Ramirez slammed a hand on the podium, his voice like thunder. "Sit down, Sergeant. You had your chance to lead. You failed. And when men were in danger, the one you mocked the most carried them through." The room went silent. Every recruit stared at Marcus. Blake sank back into his chair, shoulders slumped, stripped of the authority he'd once wielded like a weapon. That night the barracks felt lighter. Men laughed again, but the laughter wasn't cruel anymore. They clapped Marcus on the back, asked him about his father, about how he'd fixed the radio in the middle of a storm. For once he wasn't invisible. He wasn't the outsider. He was the center, and it wasn't because he demanded it. It was because he had earned it. Later, when lights went out, Johnson leaned across from his bunk and whispered, "Told you. You've got heart." Marcus didn't answer, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch like maybe, just maybe, he believed it now. The next morning, Ramirez walked past during inspection. He stopped at Marcus's bunk, checked his perfectly lined boots, and gave a small nod. Just a nod, but in this world it meant everything. It was the quiet confirmation that Marcus Hill had redefined himself, not just in our eyes but in the Army's. And though Blake still lurked in the background, his voice bitter and low, it didn't matter anymore. His shadow had been replaced by something stronger, the quiet respect of a unit that had finally seen who Marcus truly was. If this story resonates with you, Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The final week came quiet, almost too quiet. The barracks didn't echo with insults anymore. No trays were knocked from hands. No cruel laughter at Marcus's expense. Instead, there was a kind of unspoken respect. Men who once looked away now nodded when he passed. Blake still lingered, bitter and silent, but his words had lost their sting. Everyone knew the truth now. The storm had revealed it. One morning before dawn, Marcus stood alone by the flagpole. The air was cold enough to bite, and the field was slick with dew. He stood there, boots planted, eyes fixed as the flag lifted into the sky. He saluted, steady and sharp, the kind of salute that came from something deeper than muscle memory. From the corner of his eye, he saw Ramirez step onto the field. For the first time, the officer raised his hand first, returning the salute. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't applause. It was something better. It was acknowledgement. That day's PT felt different. Marcus wasn't in the back anymore. He ran up front, cadence echoing across the field. 1, 2, 3, 4. The voices roared behind him, falling into rhythm. Even the ones who once mocked him followed his pace, their boots pounding the ground in unison. For the first time, Marcus wasn't running alone. Later that evening, the barracks were alive with chatter. Guys cleaned rifles, polished boots, swapped jokes about chow hall food. But the laughter wasn't cruel anymore. Johnson leaned back on his bunk, nodding at Marcus. Never thought I'd see the day they'd follow your lead, he said, half smile on his face. Marcus shrugged, voice quiet. Neither did I. Johnson paused, then added, but you earned it. The room fell still for a moment, and every man there knew he was right. But the real moment came after lights out. Blake, who had been silent for days, finally spoke from his bunk. His voice cracked in the dark. I was wrong, Hill. The words were low, barely audible, but they carried through the room. Nobody moved. Nobody mocked. Marcus didn't gloat. He just answered, calm and steady. We all wear the same uniform. That's what matters. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult ever thrown. Blake said nothing more. The next morning, Marcus tucked his father's photo back into his locker, same as always. But now when he looked at it, there was no doubt in his eyes. He had carried the name, carried the weight, and proved himself worthy. Not because of legacy alone, but because he stood when everyone expected him to fall. As the sun rose over the base, the platoon lined up for another day. Marcus stood at the front this time, not because he demanded it, but because every man behind him chose to follow. And in the Army, that's the only kind of leadership that matters. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The last image is simple but unforgettable. The platoon stands at attention in the cool morning air, breath visible, boots pressed into the damp earth. The flag rises slowly, snapping in the wind. At the front, Marcus lifts his hand in salute. One by one, every man behind him follows. No hesitation, no mockery, no doubt. Even Ramirez, steady as stone, gives a firm nod that speaks more than 1,000 words. And for a long moment, the field is silent except for the flag flapping above them. The silence of men who know they have witnessed a turning point. That's how respect is born in the military. Not from rank shouted loud or insults thrown sharp, but from action under fire. Marcus began as the one mocked, humiliated, written off before he had a chance. But he never quit. He never raised his voice. He let his endurance, his quiet resilience, and his refusal to break carry him forward. When the storm came, it was his calm that held the line. And in the end, the man everyone counted out became the one they all chose to follow. There's a lesson in that for all of us. Injustice will come. Prejudice will find its way into every corner of life. But dignity isn't lost unless you surrender it. Brotherhood isn't built on words. It's forged in the moments when men stand together and recognize each other's worth. Actions speak louder than words, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Marcus lived both truths, and his journey reminds us that honor is not granted. It's earned. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. Tell us your experiences, your battles, your lessons. Don't forget to hit the like button to show your support and subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful story. Until then, stand strong, stay true, and remember, you're never alone in this fight.